Hey, good evening everybody. Welcome to the Weeby Kids Festive Storytelling Special. If you've not been to Weeby Kids before, know that my name is Danny. I'm one of the founders at Weeby Kids and I'm also a professional storyteller. Now you may have been following our stories and have seen them on the website. There are stories for all seasons. But with it being this special festive time, we wanted to tell you two wonderful festive stories. So the two stories that we're going to have, one of them is called The Boy, the Spruce and the Star, and the other one is called The Dear Mother. Now some of you may have heard me tell the Spruce and the Star before, but this is the first time that I have ever told the full version of the story, The Boy, the Spruce and the Star. Now some of you may like to go out and look at stars on the winter's nights. We do, we love to do it. And when you go out to look just as the sun is setting and you stare up into the sky, I don't know if you've noticed, but the sky seems to go a very, very dark shade of blue before it turns black. Well, in this story, down on some cobbled streets in a beautiful little town, there stood a little boy. He had a long, dark winter coat. He had a blue knitted winter hat and a scruffy old scarf that used to belong to his granddad. His cheeks were rosy red and he was looking up at that deep, dark blue sky. And he was waiting for the first stars to appear. And as they did, his eyes twinkled and the stars reflected in them. He looked around and the town square was busy with people. Everybody had come out. They were hanging Christmas lights up and tinsel and baubles. He could smell hot chocolate wafting through the air, cinnamon buns and popcorn. And he looked around and he thought to himself, I love living here. This is the only place that I want to be. I wish that I could stay here. You see, this was going to be his last winter here. He'd been told that after this winter they would have to leave. Now, this town sat in a very, very deep valley. And all the valley sides were bare. They had heather and grasses, but there were no trees. Except for far off in the distance, there was a big hill. And on that hill was a big spruce tree plantation. And the boy was stood in the town and he was gazing up there. And as he looked, he noticed that the snow had started to fall. And then the festive bells began to ring. And he put a hand on his heart and he cupped his ear with the other hand and he listened carefully. Up in the trees, in the forest, he could hear voices. But these weren't voices of humans. It was something else. You see, up in the trees, the magic was unfurling. Back at the autumn equinox, the little robin had flown into the woods and it had told the trees some magical stories. Stories of how all the valley sides used to be covered with trees. But every year, on the night that the snow fell and the festive bells played, some of the trees would wake up. And those trees were the trees that would join the people and the families in the winter festivities. The people would come up with sledges and axes and take a tree and put it in their house and cover it with lights and baubles and tinsel. Now all the trees were really excited as they heard this. These were the last trees of the valley. Maybe this winter it would be their turn. And this winter it was their turn. Because as the snow fell and the bells rang, up in the woods, the trees woke. They were filled with excitement. This is it! This is our year! We will get taken into the houses, we'll be decorated. People will sing songs around us, there'll be gifts passed beneath us. Oh, we can't wait, said the trees. But one of the trees wasn't very excited. One tree that sat on the far northern edge of the forest by the badger set where the broken stile lays on the ground. That tree didn't want to go into town. It called out to all the others. He said, trees, trees, we don't need to go into the town. Up here on the hill we have everything we need. We have the passing clouds and the cool wind and the beautiful songs of the birds. But the other trees shook their branches. They said, we're bored of all that. We want something new, something more exciting. We want to go into the town. And as the boy cupped his ear, he heard this. And he went home and he got in bed. And the next day, as the sun rose in the sky, the town was a beautiful, perfect picture of winter. All the roofs were covered with snow. All the edges of the houses had long icicles. As people woke up, smoke began to bellow out of the chimneys. And from up on the hillside, all the trees watched as the lights came on, as people woke up. In no time at all, they all started to come out into the streets, carrying brightly coloured sledges and big axes. And as the trees watched from the top, the people came up. Like a big parade of marching ants, they got to the edge of the forest and they looked around. All the children ran into the woods. And you could hear calls of, Mummy, this one! Daddy, this one! As the children looked for their trees. And then the woods became filled with some new sounds. The sounds of swooshing axes and whack as the steel hit the base of the tree, and then the tree would crash down. The families would put the trees on their sledges and they'd pull them back down into the town where they would take them in their houses and decorate them. And the people were happy and the trees were happy too. And as the day went on and the sun moved across the sky, with every whack of an axe and every tree that was dragged away, the sound of the axe could be heard further and further away. And this went on all the day, until all the trees were gone. All the trees except one, should I add. You see, the tree that was at the far end of the forest by the badger set and the broken stile, that one somehow, miraculously, had been saved. All the other trees were gone, and that one stood proud with the wind blowing at its back. It was so grateful that it had been spared. And it stood and it admired the view down the valley, for at last it was able to stay on the hillside. And about an hour passed, and the hillside became very still. But then off in the distance, the tree heard a noise. Voices. 2 voices. And then over the edge of the hill appeared 2 people. One of them was a big, burly man. He had a red and black checked shirt on, green trousers, and he had a big black beard. And in his hand he was carrying an axe. And the other one was a boy who wore a long winter coat, a blue knitted hat, and a tattered scarf around his neck. It used to be his grandfather's. And his cheeks were rosy red. And the boy ran ahead and he looked around and all he could see was one tree. Oh, he thought, this must be our tree. He was filled with excitement as he ran up to it. And as he got there, he looked at the tree. It was so beautiful. And then he remembered the night before when he'd heard the trees speaking. He'd never spoken to a tree before, but something inside him urged him to do so. He looked up at the tree and he said, "Tree, would you like to come to our house?" Now he wasn't expecting an answer. So just imagine how shocked he was when the tree ruffled its branches and said, "No, I really don't want to come to your house. I have everything that I need here. I am happy here and I just wish that I could stay here." And the boy looked over his shoulder to see where his father was. His father was admiring the view. So the boy took hold of the tree. He put its needles in its hands and said, "Tree, I know exactly how you feel. I just want to stay here too. I have everything that I need. And I will make sure that you don't leave." And he let go of the branch and he turned and he ran back down to his dad. He said, Dad, there's one last tree up there, but its trunk is frozen solid. There is only one way we can chop it down, and that is if the axe is very, very, very sharp. Throw me a rucksack, Dad, and let me sharpen the axe before you hit the tree. So the dad threw his rucksack down and the little boy undid the black buckles and he went inside and he pulled out a sharpening stone and he wet the sharpening stone with snow and he took the axe head and he began to sharpen the axe. But with every push, his eyes darted around, looking on the floor for something. And then he saw it. A piece of granite, no bigger than his hand. He reached down and he picked it up, and with the granite, he started to gorge away at the wedge where the axe head meets the handle. And he chipped and chipped away, and splinters of wood began to come out. It was hard, but he continued and continued until finally the axe head became loose. He carried the axe up to the tree and he lay it by its trunk and he called out, "Dad, Dad, the axe is ready, come chop down the tree." And the dad turned and he walked up the hill. His dad looked exhausted. His hands were rough and tired. He had big bags under his eyes. For he'd been working all that day and all the night before. He finally got to the tree. He grabbed the axe with two hands, and with all his might, he swung it high. But as he swung it up, the axe head that was loose went flying off into the distance, into the long grass. "Oh, drat and bother!" cried the dad. And he fell in a heap on the floor and started to cry. The little boy went over and he put his arm around his dad. He said, "Dad, don't worry. We don't need a tree this year. As long as we've got each other, everything will be okay." And his dad turned round and stood up and he gave his son a hug. And he said, "I love you, son." And the son said, "I love you, Dad." And together they turned and they walked down the hill. And they'd gone about 10 paces when the boy stopped. And he turned round and he ran back up to the tree. And he held onto the tree's branches. And he just looked at it. And the tree spoke to the boy. He said, "Thank you for your kind act. How can I ever repay you? Tell me what it is that you want." And the boy said, "All that I want is to stay in the town with my dad. That's all I want." And the tree said, "Have you ever seen a shooting star?" And the boy replied, "No, never." The tree said, "Well, did you know that the first shooting star you ever see, when you wish on it, that wish always comes true?" And the tree went on and said, "Look at the night sky tonight, because you just never know. You might see a shooting star that'll make your wish come true." And with that, the boy nodded and he turned and he ran down the hill, held his dad's hand, and together they walked into the town. And he got home and he quickly put his pajamas on and he had some supper. He got a big steaming mug of hot chocolate and he ran upstairs and he sat by his bedroom window, looking up at the sky. He could see thousands of stars, but none of them moved. It was as if they were all held in place by an invisible thread. But he watched. He didn't take his eyes off the sky. Meanwhile, back up on the hill, the tree was stood looking down the valley. And the moon had come up, and as the moon came up, it illuminated the hillside where the forest used to be. And the tree looked around, and all it could see were hundreds and hundreds of stumps. And the tree began to feel lonely. And the sky felt this loneliness and called down to the tree and said, "Tree, why are you so lonely?" And the tree said, "Because all of my friends are gone. They're all in the town and now I'm here all alone." And the sky said, "Oh, tree, you are not all alone. Feel in amongst your roots. There you have the soil. The soil is your friend. It is always there to hold you and support you. And feel out by your needles. The wind is blowing through them, for the wind is your friend. It will always be there to blow your worries away. And look up at the moon, shining its light down on you. Know that the moon is your friend too, and will always bring light in dark times. Tree, you are connected to everything. And when you realise that, you'll never be lonely again." The tree thought for a moment, and then the tree said, "But I didn't expect to feel like this, but I'm jealous too. All my friends are going to be covered in lights, and I don't have any." And the sky didn't say anything, but it beckoned over the wind. And the sky and the wind began to dance. And as they danced, they twirled and twisted and pirouetted. And as they did so, they dislodged a star. And that star shot through the sky and then gently came down to land on the top of the spruce tree. Now, down in the house, the little boy nearly jumped out of his pajamas. He was so excited. "A shooting star! A shooting star!" he said. He watched it fly across the sky and then gently land into where the forest had been. Tears began to well in his eyes. And then slowly he closed them. And he made his only wish. We're back up in the forest. The sky said to the tree, "There you are, tree. Now you have a star of your own, right on your tallest branch. And know That star is there to remind you that we are all in exactly the place that we want to be, that we are surrounded by love, and that we are connected to everything, from the smallest tree to the night sky. And with that, the tree fell silent, the sky fell silent, and the wind fell still, and all was well. So that is the boy, the spruce, and the star. And many of you may have stars on the tops of your own Christmas trees. We have one on the top of this Christmas tree here. And many people put stars on their trees for many, many different reasons. But every year when we pull ours out and we put it on the top of the tree, it's always a nice reminder of those things. How loved we are, how happy we are to be here, and how connected we all are too. So I hope you enjoyed that story. I do have another story for you. This next story is called The Deer Mother. It's a little bit different to that one. There are no people in this one, but many, many, many animals. Now, this story is a story that was told way across all of the northern lands at around the time of the winter solstice. And the winter solstice is coming up. It's the 21st of December. And it is the time when the day and the night are exactly the same amount of day and the same amount of night. And from December the 21st, the light begins to come back. So every day from then on in the northern hemisphere becomes a little bit lighter. So this story is a story that was told to bring back the light. And it also has a couple of little parts in there as well, which may help you link to some other stories that you know from about this time of year. So this story happened on the coldest night of the coldest winter ever. It was so cold that all of the rivers and the streams and the lakes and the lochs were frozen solid. It was so cold that the earth itself was frozen. Normally at this time of year, all of the animals would be down in the earth hibernating. But the earth was so cold that they'd all come up onto land. And in the middle of a big forest, in a glade, an opening, all the animals had gathered. The biggest animals in the centre, the smallest animals on the outside. And it was very, very, very cold. And the animals were all huddled together. They were very, very still. But then all of a sudden there was a lot of movement out on the edge. And one of the creatures began to burrow its way through to the middle, and it popped up in the middle, and it was the fox. And there in the middle was the great bear. And the fox said, Great bear, something must be done. Out on the edge, all the small animals, they are freezing to death. They're not going to make it through this night unless we do something. And the great bear stood up and looked around. And on the edge, you could see the small animals shivering. And the great bear said, You are right, something must be done. We need a creature to head to the southern lands and bring back the sun. And the fox said, Yes, and it must be a creature that can travel fast and travel far and has a very, very courageous heart, because this isn't an easy journey. And it must also be able to carry the sun. And the bear thought for a moment. And the bear said, You are right. Maybe it should be the birds. One of the birds can go and bring the sun back. And the fox called for the raven, but the raven said, The birds can't go. All the birds are tired. We can't go. We can't travel that far. So Fox looked at Bear and said, Son, who will go? Who can go? And the bear asked, who will travel to the southern lands and bring back the sun? And there was silence. And then off in the trees, just outside of the huddle, there was movement. The creature that had been sat in the darkness stood up and began to walk into the light. This creature had grey fur. It had a big, black, wet nose. And on its head, it had big, beautiful, velvet antlers. It was the reindeer. The reindeer said, I will go. I will travel to the southern lands and I will bring back the sun. And the fox looked at the bear and the bear said, yes, you can go. You can travel long distances. You are very brave and courageous. But how will you carry the sun? And the reindeer looked and lowered its head and said, do you see these antlers? I will carry the sun back in my antlers to the northern lands and break this freezing winter. And the bear nodded its head. And the bear raised its hands high and it said, brother reindeer, you have my blessing. But before it could finish its sentence, the reindeer interrupted. Brother reindeer, it said, do you not know anything of the reindeer herds? At this time of year, the male reindeers, they shed their antlers. And only the female reindeers keep their antlers through the winter. Do you not know this, great bear? I am not brother reindeer, but I am mother deer. And with that, mother deer turned and she sauntered off into the forest. She knew what a huge journey lay ahead of her. And she knew that if she didn't get back soon, all the animals would perish in the snow. So she began to walk. And she walked and walked. And as she walked, she occasionally nibbled the spruce trees to give her energy. And maybe she thought, maybe this journey was too long. And as she went on, up ahead, she heard a noise, a rustling around in the bushes. She broke through the spruce trees and there on the edge of a glade was a big man, a big, burly man. He was wearing green robes that were made out of all of the plants of the forest. It was made of moss and holly and ivy. And the robe went all around his body and down to the ground. He had a big, white, matted beard and matted white hair that came right down his back. And on his head, he wore a green hat, also made of moss. And over his shoulder, he carried a big sack. And this man turned and he saw Mother Deer coming out of the trees. And immediately he knelt down and he bowed, for he knew the power of the Mother Deer. And he looked up and he said, Mother Deer, you should be out on the plains at this time of year. What are you doing here in the forest? And Mother Deer went on to tell this man what had happened, and to tell him that she was heading to the southern lands to bring back the sun. And the old man stroked his beard. He said, that is a long, long journey. It will take you days and days to get there. Let me help you. Excuse me. For I know the magic of the forest. And with that, he turned and he began to rummage around in his bag as if he was looking for something. And eventually, he reappeared, and in his hand, he had a huge mushroom. It was pure white, and the top had a red cap that was covered in white spots. And he said to Mother Deer, "Take this mushroom and eat it, and it will give you magic powers that will make this journey much easier for you." So Mother Deer lowered her head and she began to eat the mushroom. And when she had finished it, she turned and the big man stroked the back of her head and wished her well, and on she went. And again she began to walk. But as she walked, she had an urge to pick up the pace. She began to canter along. And then before you know it, she was running faster and faster and faster through the trees. She came into a big opening, and the opening made her run even faster still. She ran and ran and ran, getting closer and closer to the trees on the other side. Surely if she didn't slow down or stop, she would crash into them and her journey would be over. But something in her heart told her, run faster, run faster. And she did. And as she got to the other side of the forest, she didn't crash into the trees. For just before she hit them, her front hooves came off the ground, and her back hooves too. And Mother Deer took to the sky. She flew up over the forest. She flew over the mountains. Down below she could see the valleys, and the further south she went, the mountains turned from white with snow to pure green. She flew and flew and flew until she arrived at the southern lands. And when she got there, she saw the sun goddess. She said to the sun goddess, "It is time to return to the northern lands. If you don't come now, all the animals will perish." But the sun goddess said, "Mother Deer, I am so exhausted. I have been warm in the southern lands for all this time, and I can't make the journey to the northern lands, not now." And Mother Deer lowered her antlers again. She said to the sun goddess, "Climb in, and I will carry you back." And the sun goddess climbed into the antlers of Mother Deer. And Mother Deer turned and began to gallop through the sky all the way back. And as she galloped, the darkness ahead became lighter and lighter. She went over the green valleys and the green hills until she came to the snow line. And she went on and on, until in the distance she saw the great forests of the northern lands. And she went on and on and on, and as she flew over the forest, the sun goddess created the most beautiful sunrise. The heat from the sun began to melt the snow. The heat from the sun began to warm the animals. The heat from the sun chased out the winter. And all was well. So I hope you enjoyed that story. The Deer Mother. It's a lovely story. That story I pieced it together from lots of little bits that I could find. It's such an old story that lots of parts of it were missing and broken up. But I hope you enjoyed it. And I also hope that you can tell that to other people as well. Because with any of the old stories which are being forgotten, it's important that we do our best to try and remember them and keep them going. We know how old this story is because historians have looked at the artworks and the paintings that were found from the ancient people, and at this time of year, the deer was always depicted with the sun in her antlers, and often with her antlers the tree of life. the tree that supports all living things. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you have a wonderful winter solstice on the 21st. I'm not sure if you're doing anything to celebrate. We often like to get up and walk to the top of a hill nearby where we watch the sun rise, and then we go up there again to watch the sun set as well. Just a nice little ritual that we have. We also do a log burning ceremony too, which is always lots of fun. So have lovely, lovely, lovely winter celebrations, and we'll see you again sometime soon at Wee Bee Kids. Bye.